In the final hours of the Third Reich, as Berlin collapsed into fire and rubble, one Nazi family vanished behind the sealed doors of a bunker beneath the city. 6 children, 2 parents, no escape, no future. What happened to Joseph Goebbels' family after the war is not only a story of death, but of secrets, erased graves, and a legacy that refused to die. And the truth is far stranger than most people realize. By the spring of 1945, Nazi Germany was already a corpse that continued to move. The Red Army was inside Berlin. Artillery pounded the city day and night. Entire districts were reduced to smoldering ruins. In the heart of that collapsing world, deep beneath the shattered streets, Adolf Hitler and his closest followers waited in the Führerbunker. Among them was Joseph Goebbels, Reich Minister of Propaganda, and his wife Magda. With them were their 6 children: Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Holdine, Hedwig, and the youngest, Haida, aged between 4 and 12. Goebbels had sworn absolute loyalty to Hitler. He had built his life, his ideology, and even his family identity around the Nazi myth. By April 1945, with Germany in ruins, he still refused to accept any future that did not include National Socialism. To him, a world without Hitler was a world not worth living in. And for his children, raised as symbols of the ideal Aryan family, he believed there was no life beyond the Reich either. Inside the bunker, as Hitler prepared his own suicide, Goebbels was named Reich Chancellor in Hitler's final political testament. The title meant nothing. The government no longer existed in any real sense. The Soviet tanks were only blocks away. Escape was impossible. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun took their own lives. Their bodies were burned in the garden above the bunker. Power passed briefly and pointlessly to Goebbels. In the hours that followed, the atmosphere in the bunker shifted from desperate hope to suffocating finality. Those still inside understood that the end was no longer approaching. It had already arrived. What happened next would become one of the most haunting family crimes in modern history. Magda Goebbels had long been deeply devoted to Hitler, often referring to him as the guiding force of her life. She believed National Socialism was not just a political movement, but a sacred destiny. As the bunker closed in on itself, she reached a conclusion that she would later write about in her final letter, that her children could not and must not live in a world without National Socialism. On the night of May 1st, 1945, the 6 Goebbels children were dressed in their nightclothes. They were given what they were told was medicine to help them sleep. The exact sequence of events inside their small bunker room remains disputed in detail, but the outcome is not. Each child was poisoned with cyanide. Some evidence suggests that they were first sedated with morphine. Others believe the cyanide capsules were placed directly in their mouths by Magda or by an SS doctor present in the bunker. By morning, all 6 children were dead. Shortly afterward, Joseph and Magda Goebbels left the bunker together. In the garden above, near where Hitler's body had been burned just hours earlier, they ended their own lives. Joseph Goebbels shot himself. Magda consumed cyanide. Their bodies, like Hitler's, were burned by their remaining aides in a shallow, hurried cremation as Soviet troops closed in. When the Red Army finally captured the area, they discovered the charred remains of the Goebbels parents outside and, more shockingly, the intact bodies of the 6 children inside the bunker. The scene stunned even battle-hardened Soviet soldiers. The children lay in their beds, still in sleepwear, their faces calm. The brutality of a defeated regime had reached its final expression not in battle, but in the murder of its own offspring. In the days following the fall of Berlin, Soviet authorities conducted secret investigations into the bunker deaths. The remains of Hitler, the Goebbels family, and other Nazi leaders were quietly collected by Soviet counterintelligence units. Contrary to popular belief, these bodies were not immediately destroyed. Instead, they entered a long, shadowy afterlife in Soviet custody. The Goebbels children were initially buried in unmarked graves near a Soviet military facility. Their parents' remains, along with those of Hitler and other bunker occupants, were moved multiple times across East Germany over the following years. These relocations were conducted in complete secrecy. The Soviet leadership feared that any known grave could become a pilgrimage site for extremist sympathizers. For decades, the truth about the final fate of the Goebbels family remained buried under layers of classified Soviet records. In the West, rumors spread wildly. Some believed the children had survived. Others claimed their remains had been paraded through Moscow. Both were false. The reality, hidden behind Cold War secrecy, was quieter and more deliberate. In 1970, 25 years after the war had ended, the Soviet KGB made a final decision. The remaining bones of Hitler, Eva Braun, Joseph Goebbels, Magda Goebbels, and their 6 children were exhumed one last time from their secret burial site in Magdeburg. They were fully cremated. The ashes were scattered into the Elbe River. No grave, no marker, no physical trace left behind. The intention was clear. erased the possibility of any shrine, any legend, any physical anchor for Nazi memory. But while the bodies were destroyed, the legacy of the Goebbels family did not vanish so easily. There was one child of Magda Goebbels who did survive the war, because he was not Joseph Goebbels' son. From her first marriage to industrialist Günther Quandt, Magda had a son named Harold Quandt. Unlike his half-siblings, Harold was already a young man during the war. He had served as a Luftwaffe pilot and was captured by Allied forces in Italy in 1944. While the 6 Goebbels children were dying beneath Berlin, Harold was sitting in a prisoner of war camp, completely unaware that his entire family was being wiped out. It would take months before he learned the truth, that his mother, his stepfather, and all 6 of his younger siblings were dead. Harold was released from captivity in 1947. Unlike many children of top Nazi leadership, he would go on to live a long, highly successful and publicly visible life. He became a major industrialist in West Germany, eventually becoming one of the wealthiest men in the country through the Quandt industrial empire, with deep involvement in companies such as BMW. Yet the shadow of his family history never fully left him. Harold rarely spoke publicly about his mother. He did not glorify the regime, nor did he attempt to defend it. But the knowledge that he alone survived a family annihilated by ideology followed him for the rest of his life. He died in 1967 in a plane crash, long after the world had begun to mythologize the bunker and forget the human cost inside it. As West Germany rebuilt itself from the ruins of Nazism, the Goebbels name became toxic. For decades, it was rarely spoken outside of academic study and war crime trials. Joseph Goebbels' propaganda legacy, however, lived on in a darker form. His methods became case studies in psychological manipulation, disinformation, and mass indoctrination. His speeches were analyzed not as inspiration, but as warnings. The memory of the 6 children became one of the most uncomfortable symbols of the regime's collapse. They were not soldiers. They were not political actors. They were victims of a belief system that refused to acknowledge a future without itself. Their deaths forced historians to confront a brutal reality. Nazi fanaticism did not end at the battlefield. It followed its believers into parenthood, into family, and into the most intimate decisions imaginable. In East Germany, where the bunker ruins lay, public discussion of the event was heavily controlled. The Soviets did not want the narrative shaped by Western media, nor did they want sympathy narratives that could be twisted into martyrdom myths. The site of the Führerbunker was sealed, buried, built over, and officially forgotten. Apartment buildings now stand where the final chapter of the Goebbels family unfolded. In the West, however, documentaries, books, and testimonies slowly reconstructed the story. Survivors who had been present in the bunker were interrogated for years. Each version filled in fragments of the final hours. Over time, a grim consensus emerged. The choices had been deliberate, the murders had been planned, and the justifications had been ideological to the end. Magda Goebbels' final letter, recovered after the war, revealed the depth of her conviction. She wrote that the world which awaited her children after Hitler's death was not worth living in. In her mind, protecting them from that future meant killing them herself. It was not the language of despair alone. It was the language of belief carried to its most horrifying conclusion. In post-war Germany, the Goebbels children became a symbol not of innocence alone, but of what happens when ideology replaces humanity. Schools quietly taught the story as a cautionary tale. The regime that once promised a 1,000-year Reich could not even grant its own children a chance at survival. Over the years, journalists attempted to trace what became of any extended Goebbels relatives. Most faded into anonymity. None sought public attention. The name itself had become an inheritance of shame. Unlike other Nazi families that attempted rehabilitation through public apology or activism, the Goebbels lineage largely withdrew from public view. The question of responsibility followed the story for decades, while Joseph and Magda Goebbels pulled the trigger. Historians have continued to debate where ultimate culpability lies, with fanatic individuals, with the system that radicalized them, or with the culture of unquestioned loyalty that Nazism cultivated. The conclusion, increasingly, is that the murders were the product of all three. The physical fate of the children may have been sealed in a bunker room in 1945, but their psychological echo remained. Each retelling forces a confrontation with a deeper truth. The collapse of the Third Reich was not only the defeat of an army, it was the destruction of a worldview so absolute that its believers chose annihilation over adaptation. Even today, the Goebbels children remain one of the most disturbing symbols of the war's end. Their faces appear in black and white photographs, smiling, well-dressed, posed for propaganda images that once projected the ideal Nazi family to the German public. Those images now exist in cruel contrast with the knowledge of what awaited them beneath Berlin. The Soviet decision to destroy their remains in 1970 closed the final physical chapter of their story. No grave, no memorial, no place for mourning. only archives, testimony, and memory. And yet, their story continues to surface again and again, because it forces us to confront not only the crimes of leaders, but the vulnerability of children caught inside ruined belief systems. They did not fall in battle. They were not victims of a bombing raid. They were killed in silence by their own parents for an idea that had already collapsed in the streets above them. Joseph Goebbels devoted his life to shaping reality through lies. In the end, reality crushed everything he had built, including his own family. The Goebbels children were never given a choice. Their lives were ended not by the enemy at the gates, but by the ideology that raised them. Their story is one of the final, darkest echoes of the Third Reich, a reminder that fanaticism does not only destroy nations, it destroys families from the inside out. What do you think drives someone to believe so completely that even their own children have no place in a conquered world? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this documentary powerful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into history. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.